NBA Weekly Roundup with our friend Tom Haberstroth. Trade deadline day has passed. It was crazy, Tom. We'll get into the specific deals in just a second, but let's start with your big winner on the day.
Big winner for me is Milwaukee Bucks. And you might be sitting there being like, wait, they didn't really do any moves at the trade deadline. Well, no one else did at the top of the NBA. Look, the Los Angeles Lakers stood pat. The Toronto Raptors stood pat. The Boston Celtics didn't make a move. And if you're if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, you're looking at this situation and saying, who am I going to be scared about come June? So they're 43-7. They have Giannis healthy, Chris Middleton healthy, Eric Bledsoe healthy. Everyone seems to be terrified of the Milwaukee Bucks, and yet there was no serious upgrade for any of the teams. Look, the Clippers got Marcus Morris, who's a nice rotation piece, but if you're the Milwaukee Bucks, I think you're thrilled about not just this season, but Giannis Antetokounmpo could sign a Supermax extension this summer, and I don't think as of now, as of the trade deadline, the Giannis is looking around the league and saying, does anyone have a better shot at the title than we do? And they didn't get a Karl Anthony Towns. Boston Celtics didn't get a superstar at the five position. So if I'm Milwaukee, I'm feeling pretty good about today's events because everyone seemed to get better on the fringes rather than one of these haymakers from a contender.
Sometimes when you just don't mess it up, right? You just don't mess it up if you're the Bucks and you can be a winner. So how about the losers? I heard you mention the Celtics there. Who would be your losers on today?
Yeah, the Celtics, I just feel like when they're looking at this postseason, they've got a lot of young talent, but they also have all these picks that they could convert into a real player. And whether they were knocking on the door for Karl Anthony Towns or another star around the NBA, a disgruntled star in the NBA, and maybe there just wasn't that piece and they stood pat. It's a difficult proposition. If you're Danny Ainge looking forward, do you think this team is a title team? Maybe you think that next year they're built for next season. But, I'm looking at the Boston Celtics and wondering if they're able to get over the hump. They didn't make a big move, and they're steady right now at the 5 position. So I think they caught a little bit of an L today. But I think another team, the Detroit Pistons, all you could get for Andre Drummond was a second-round pick. I feel like if that was your only haul for Andre Drummond, who's leading the league in rebounds, you got to test the market better earlier in the season and maybe try to get something more. So Detroit Pistons, I'm not really sure what the direction they're going in. If Derrick Rose is still on the roster and you get a second-round pick for Andre Drummond, I get it. They're moving into a new chapter in the franchise, but why is Derrick Rose still on the team if you're trying to move on from this era and trying to rebuild? Doesn't really make much sense to just get a second-round pick for Andre Drummond. Also, big L for all the free agents, including Andre Drummond this summer. There's not a lot of cap space this summer, which means all these free agents trying to get a big deal this summer, they might be waiting out in the dark.
Let me dig a little bit deeper on Andre Drummond because I think that return was surprising to a lot of people out there. I mean, this is a player who you mentioned, one of the best rebounders in the league, one of the better big men. What does it say about the current state of the NBA that he could only fetch a second-round pick years down the road?
He's a guy who is a rim runner. He's a guy who might block a shot here or there, but the Detroit Pistons have not built a strong defensive outfit with him anchoring at the 5. It just hasn't happened. He's had a couple coaches here with Stan Van Gundy and Dwayne Casey try to make it work, and even then, it doesn't seem to click for him defensively. And if you're going to be an elite rebounder, you might be better on the boards as a team than where the Detroit Pistons are. They are not an elite rebounding team. It just seems like teams around the league looked at him and said, he's not a modern day big. He's not a guy who's going to get a ton of assists and be a playmaker with the ball, and he's not a spacer. So what I think is the deal with Andre Drummond is he just doesn't have the requisite skills to be a star in today's NBA. He's a big-time leaper. He gets a lot of rebounds, but in terms of turning those skills and turning it into a winning player, look at Nikola Jokic. He can barely jump over a phone book, and yet he is so much more effective at winning basketball games than Andre Drummond, who can jump out of a gym. So I think the market really is telling is that Andre Drummond needs to get better at the modern day NBA game, at shooting, spacing the floor. He does not have that skill set yet. For him, he needs to prove that the rest of this season, and maybe picks up that player option coming into next season and works on that jumper and proves that he can be a modern day center.
Perhaps the biggest deal of the day involved the Warriors and Timberwolves. Andrew Wiggins going to the Warriors. They're also getting a first-round pick that's top 3 protected. That comes next year. D'Angelo Russell going over to the Timberwolves, hooking up with his friend Karl Anthony Towns once again. What was your impression of that deal for both teams?
You know, I'm surprised that they didn't get more for D'Angelo Russell. It seems like he's putting up huge box score numbers. Of course, the wins haven't been coming for the Golden State Warriors with him leading the team, but I was surprised that they made this deal. One, because they could have waited. They could have saw what they had with Stephen Curry and D'Angelo Russell this season when Stephen Curry comes back, and then they can revisit the market this summer when a lot more teams are going to try to make an upgrade with the free agency class so shallow. I'm surprised that they made this deal. They did not get the Minnesota Timberwolves first-round pick this season. They did not get their fully unprotected pick next season, and they didn't get the Brooklyn Nets pick that the Minnesota Timberwolves acquired earlier in the week from the Atlanta Hawks. So if I'm Steve Kerr, I gotta be excited about the talent of Andrew Wiggins, but to me, I'd rather have Robert Covington. He's an elite 3-and-D guy, and that's perfect for what Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry and Steve Kerr need. Look, the number 1 overall pick, Andrew Wiggins, is now on the Golden State Warriors, but I just don't think he does the things that the Golden State Warriors need, namely shooting threes at a high rate and playing lockdown defense. He has the potential, but maybe Steve Kerr and the Golden State Warriors believe the culture will flip the switch for him.
Let's stay out west in California there, go a little south and talk about the Clippers and the Lakers. It seemed like they were both in on Marcus Morris. The Clippers ending up getting him. Knicks getting a first-round pick back. But what do you make of that move for the Clippers and then the Lakers kind of standing pat here?
Historically, Markieff and Marcus Morris have been one of the top defenders of LeBron James going back since their days in Detroit. I mean, these two guys have been really, really good at just being strong, smart defenders in LeBron's way. Then they got Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. I think that's what they were doing, is trying to make sure that they had enough bodies to throw at LeBron James in that showdown. We've never seen the Clippers and the Lakers come playoff time. This will be a first if they finally face off against each other. But I think the Clippers certainly got the upper hand. I think they got more depth. I think they have more experience coaching deep into the postseason in Doc Rivers. They got star power in Kawhi Leonard and Montrezl Harrell and Paul George and Lou Will. I just think that they are much deeper, have more star power, deeper in their roster than the Los Angeles Lakers. And I think at this point, it's really hard to blame the Lakers not making an upgrade at the deadline. It's been a really rough time with the tragic passing of Kobe Bryant. But if we're just going to be looking at this from 30,000 feet, the Lakers need to do a better job of upgrading the roster than what they have right now if they want to compete with the Los Angeles Clippers and the Milwaukee Bucks.
Are you surprised ultimately that Kyle Kuzma is still on the Lakers?
I am, especially because I think I would have traded him to Detroit for Derrick Rose, get another ball handler, a guy who can come off the bench or in the starting role and get you buckets. I don't think Kyle Kuzma as a fit next to Anthony Davis and LeBron James makes a lot of sense. And the Detroit Pistons, it kind of felt like they were ready to move on from Derrick Rose, considering that they traded Andre Drummond, and they're trying to turn the page here and move the franchise in a different direction. But Kyle Kuzma, they have been successful in the regular season with him and Anthony Davis and LeBron James on the floor together. But I just don't know if come playoff time he's ready to win a championship as the third wheel. But you know what, Ahmed? I said the same thing about Kyrie Irving next to LeBron James, and they won a title in 2016, maybe the most impressive title ever in NBA history. So what do I know?
Sometimes it can work. You know a lot, Tom, but sometimes it does work out in different ways than you would have anticipated. What about, how do you anticipate Andre Iguodala finally got out of Memphis, didn't want to be there, didn't want to play there. He gets his wish, goes to the Heat. Does that elevate them up to maybe the number 2 team in the East?
I wrote a big column this summer calling him the No Stats Hall of Famer, Andre Iguodala, named after Shane Battier, who's in the front office for the Miami Heat, who was called by Michael Lewis at the New York Times, the guy who wrote the Moneyball book, called him the No Stats All-Star. And I think Andre Iguodala is the no stats Hall of Famer, a guy who's going to fit nicely next to Jimmy Butler, play both ends of the floor. He's a playmaker. He might not be a knockdown shooter like he used to be for the Golden State Warriors, but I love the deal from Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley's end. I think he's going to be a winner for them, and he's going to just dig in defensively. And there's just not a lot of guys defensively who can bring it like Andre Iguodala, even at age 36. It's interesting that they gave him a 2-year extension on top of the deal. It's a risky move, but if we've seen anything from the Pat Riley regime, it's that he can turn any sort of bad contract into a really nice opportunity. You see James Johnson, Dion Waiters, guys who barely played for the Miami Heat, and he got Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder. Really two nice pieces for their championship quest. Do I think they're better than Milwaukee? No. I don't think anybody right now is better than Milwaukee, and Miami included. They got an upgrade on Andre Iguodala. He will help, but I just don't think he's enough to put them over the edge in the East.
What about the 4-team deal before I let you go? Hawks getting Clint Capela, Rockets getting the guy you mentioned earlier, Robert Covington.
Can you play center for the Rockets, Ahmed? Because they're taking applications right now. They don't have a center right now. They're a team that is trying to reinvent the wheel a little bit, go super small with P.J. Tucker at the 5 and Robert Covington being a floor spacer at his former digs in Houston. They took a flyer on him years ago, and he has since been one of the darlings of the analytics community, being for 6 years in the NBA. Always his team has been better with him on the floor than him on the bench, and he doesn't light up the box score, but I really like the move from this perspective. Russell Westbrook needs space to thrive in the half court. Against the Trailblazers last year in the postseason, Steven Adams trying to set screens, it clogged the paint, and I think the Rockets are trying to get as much space as possible for Russell Westbrook and James Harden to attack. They're going to score a lot of points. There's no doubt about it. But they're also going to give up a lot of points with P.J. Tucker at the 5. So, hey, look, I don't think the status quo was enough to beat the Lakers or the Clippers in the postseason. Maybe this is a high variance move that if they get hot, they can maybe make a big upset. And let's see what happens. But it's certainly high variance. It can be really good or it can be really bad. And with Russell Westbrook and James Harden, that is a big swing. We'll see what happens come playoff time. It'll be amazing to watch.
As always, Tom, you were amazing once again. A really fun day at the trade deadline. Good information, Tom. Well done.
Thanks, Ahmed.